From the moment I remember my consciousness switch itself on, a battle began raging within my brain. Given the fact that I wasn't yet a teenager, I often felt like those thoughts didn't belong to me, as if an alien life form took over my cerebral activities, teaching me the meaning of pain, darkness, misery, and death despite my surroundings remaining relatively unchanged. It took years to somewhat understand the consequence of my upbringing upon my subconscious. All I seemed to be driven towards without really making active, conscious decisions, falling into traps of dependency, of cyclical sorrow that went unnoticed by those that claimed to care. Time went by, I got worse. It became easier to escape from all that I did not understand or could not seem to control, or just didn't wish to confront. I would spend my days awake, yet unconscious, walking, speaking, breathing, yet forever pulling away from recognizing the rabbit hole I dug for myself. The rock bottom that felt like home, simply because I learned from a young age that home is where comfort is, not hearts, not love, not understanding or empathy, but the mere threshold of physical comfort. You're alive, you're fed, you have a house, a roof, a bed, what else? And so I learned to live in denial like those around me, to pretend and perform, to listen for footsteps, to eavesdrop into conversations lest I hear my name mentioned, subconsciously aware of a certain tension subsuming all the interactions I would have with those that were supposed to be loved ones. Tiptoeing around glaring problems we learn to block out, always in the process of escaping from something. No wonder I have felt on edge, always hyper-vigilant, forever listening to the living breaths of the world around me. I can't say that didn't do a number on my awareness. I chased an unconscious wakefulness in different forms, running from the present and, in turn, losing sight of the future. When existence feels like a struggle, then each day is a war to survive, even if fought solely inside your head. The potency of toxic thought patterns is undeniable. Yet, I had my thoughts and feelings dismissed long enough to learn to ignore the consequences of all those storms brewing within. After all, you can just not pay attention to those voices, right? This denial, these debates over the legitimacy of one's experience, the comparisons and tallies of all the pain and suffering, of the privilege and dependency that hung around my neck like a noose. How could I truly account for all I have parasitically sucked out of the ones I depend on? How can I pay back all the millions spent on keeping me alive? How could I ever not be a burden? So much unsaid, and all the lives left unimagined. The worlds between us we often refuse to recognize. Each experience that demands legitimization before any empathy is accorded. That respect we buy, the love we balance out in company books. Everything that further detaches us from the undeniable humanity that links the best and worst of us together. Yes, being human is being alive, isn't it? Yet, some days I don't feel human. Some days I don't see those I despise as human. Where is that dialectic distance? the void between the signified and the signifier, the rift between our existence and our performance. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Apart from learning to accept the absurd, common usage of this saying often assumes that acceptance. The assumption of human agency, for example, often leads us to expect equivalent experiences and perspectives out of people that might have lived vastly different lives. We can see the function of this judgment in the process of othering. A foundational ideal in many tyrannous regimes, it helps categorize that which we don't or refuse to understand. The perception of colonization, for example, as some objective good, bringing civilization to savages. Well, what do you do, having your philosophy of being human, when you look at someone living a drastically different life? I guess you don't think of them as humans anymore, right? Quoting the immensely influential Nigerian novelist Chinua Achebe in his critique of Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, can nobody see the preposterous and perverse arrogance in thus reducing Africa to the role of props for the breakup of one petty European mind? But that is not even the point. The real question is the dehumanization of Africa and Africans, which this age-long attitude has fostered and continues to foster in this world. Indeed, this perception of the other, as he goes on to say, creates the perception of Africa as setting and backdrop, which eliminates the African as a human factor. Africa as a metaphysical battlefield devoid of all recognizable humanity. Indeed, the experience of being unheard has been a quintessential part of human experience, an integral part of the suffering and struggles of all the marginalized people that were dehumanized just to legitimize their difference, to bridge that dialectic gap. They're not like us because they're not human. Is difference that difficult to reconcile? And this starts somewhere, doesn't it? Some might think using examples of tragedies long gone is futile. Some might also think that fictitious narratives have no bearing on reality. Well, personally, I have found it hard getting people to recognize the consequence of the past on the present if they don't already see it. It is harder still to convince them of the inherently human nature of fiction in its representation of the human experience. After all, no one reading Dostoevsky who has read of the condition of 19th century Russia would think, oh, that's some far-fetched stuff. It is categorized as European realism for a reason, isn't it? Drawing these connections to me is an extremely important part in cultivating empathy and understanding. You don't have to read 100 books to understand people, but it certainly helps. As little as being mindful of the people we interact with, their rich and often complicated internal lives that we should allow space for when dealing with those of our species. After all, what's the fuss about consciousness and awareness if we can't take a second to pause and reflect on our actions, if possible, given our individual conditions? If charity begins at home, then where does our understanding of being human originate? I would like to imagine in moments of relative peace that the world feels lighter for everyone. But that solipsism only makes it easier to forget the immensity of the human experience, the depth and length of suffering that spills over geographic borders. How much, then, has been left unsaid? How many dreams left unimagined solely due to one's inability to be seen as human? And I guess a more prescient question: what can I do about it? There is a chronic helplessness that accompanies the hyperconnectivity of the 21st century. It is easy to grow apathetic or be unfazed due to the incalculable accounts of exploitation and destitution that surround our media sphere. A lot of us are a part of some of those statistics of suffering. So, do we truly have the power to make tangible change? All I can say, without assuming too much of the experiences of others, is that we do have the power to affect the lives of those around us. Whether we have families or not, whether those families are functional or not, we do interact with people that are quintessential to the functioning of our own lives. Whether they are employees of establishments we frequent or any other transitory figure whose existence coincides with ours, we have those ephemeral interactions to affect, however slightly, the trajectories of their lives. Could we make the world a kinder place with these seemingly inconsequential actions? Maybe, maybe not. But we have to try, don't we? We have to survive together as long as we have afforded ourselves, given the often reckless course our collective evolution has taken. Elvin Semrad, an influential psychotherapist and professor, mentioned how the greatest sources of our suffering are the lies we tell ourselves. As an extension to that, a lot of the suffering we cause is based not only on those lies, but also the lies we learn to believe about others. In the throes of this pandemic, suffering has seeped into the seemingly secure surroundings a lot of us have found comfort in. It has opened up some eyes to the cracks in the system. For others, it merely solidified their denial. Could we change all minds alike? I doubt it. Ultimately, we cannot take the world on our shoulders. The weight will break our backs before it makes someone's life better. As I mentioned in my video about pain, what is in our power is to give space for the experience, the existence, and the humanity of those around us. I might be wrong, and I'm waiting to be called out on it, as long as it helps us be better to each other, to leave less unsaid, to let fewer dreams go unimagined, to allow more lives to find fulfillment without having to justify their existence or their humanity.